The sky above Velorath was always violet. Not dark like a bruise, not pale like a flower. It was a deep, rich violet, the kind that made visitors from other worlds stop walking and just stare upward for a while. The two moons of Velorath sat on opposite ends of the horizon most mornings, and when the sun rose between them, it turned the whole sky into something that looked almost too beautiful to be real. Saravel had grown up under that sky. She had played under it as a child. She had studied under it as a student. And now, as a young scientist working in the Orbital Research Division, she looked at it every single morning from the wide glass windows of the peace station and felt the same small warmth in her chest that she had always felt. She loved her world. There was no more complicated way to say it. Velorath was home to the Velkari, a people who had reached the stars long before most species in the galaxy. They were tall, slender, and moved with a quiet kind of grace that other species sometimes mistook for coldness. Their skin carried a faint glow under sunlight, soft blues and silvers depending on the family line. They lived long lives and spent those lives in the pursuit of knowledge, art, and careful diplomacy. War, to the Velkari, was something that happened to younger and rougher civilizations. It was not something that happened to them. That belief had held for a very long time. On the morning everything changed, Saravel was standing in the main hall of the new orbital peace station. It had taken 6 years to build and 3 years of negotiations between 14 different worlds to agree on its design. Today was the opening ceremony. Delegates from 11 species filled the hall, dressed in their finest, speaking in polite and careful voices. Her father, High Diplomat Velarin, stood near the front of the room beside the council's senior representatives, his silver ceremonial robes pressed perfectly smooth. Saravel was not at the front. She was near the back by the observation windows because she had always preferred watching things from a distance. It gave her a better view. She was looking out at the stars when the stars changed. At first it looked like a cluster of new lights appearing in the black, small at first, then growing, then far too many, far too fast. Her scientific mind counted them before her fear caught up 1, 5, 12, 20, 30, and she stopped counting because the number didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the shape of them. Long and angular and dark, built in the way that things are built when their only purpose is to cause damage. She had seen images of Dreth warships in intelligence briefings. She had read about the Dreth Dominion the way people read about disasters in other parts of the world, with sympathy and a quiet relief that it was far away. The Dreth were conquerors. That was the only word for what they did. They moved through the outer systems like a slow tide, swallowing worlds, breaking whatever resisted, and leaving behind only obedience or ruin. The outer systems had seemed far away. They were not far away anymore. The first strike hit Velorath's orbital defense grid before any alarm had sounded. The peace station shook hard enough to throw 3 delegates off their feet. The lights flickered. Through the observation window, Saravel watched a section of the defense grid, a structure that had taken 9 years to build, crack apart like dry wood, and spin off into the dark in pieces. A second strike followed before anyone in the hall had finished screaming from the first. The Velkari defense fleet responded. Saravel watched that too. She watched the slim, elegant ships of her people move out to meet the Dreth formation, and she watched how quickly it became clear that something was very wrong. Velkari ships were precision instruments. They were designed for research escorts, for border monitoring, for careful and measured responses to manageable threats. They were not designed for this. The Dreth fleet absorbed every strike and returned each one twice over. Within 11 minutes, 4 Velkari ships were destroyed. Within 20, the defense formation had broken apart. The hall was chaos. Delegates were being guided toward emergency shelters by station crew. Her father was speaking rapidly into a communication device, his voice low and tight in a way she had never heard from him before. Saravel crossed the room to his side without thinking. "Father," she said. He looked at her. For just a moment, the diplomat disappeared and she saw something underneath, something tired and frightened and old. Then he straightened and put a hand briefly on her shoulder. "Go to the shelter below," he said. "I will be there shortly." "What are we doing?" she asked. "What is the council doing?" "We are sending distress signals," he said, "to every allied world to Earth." Earth? Saravel had grown up near the Joint Research Station on Velorath's northern continent, the station where human scientists and Velkari scholars worked side by side on shared projects. She had known humans her whole life. She respected them. They were a young species, barely a few centuries into space travel, and they brought with them a kind of loud and restless energy that the Velkari generally found charming in small doses and exhausting in large ones. They were good allies. Honest, usually. Reliable often. But they were not warriors, not in the way that would matter today. She said none of this to her father. She simply nodded and moved toward the shelter stairs with the others. The shelter was 3 levels below the station's main deck. It was designed for exactly this kind of situation: reinforced walls, air recyclers, emergency power, enough food and water for 60 people for 2 weeks. About 40 people were crowded into it now. Some were crying quietly. Some were sitting very still with blank expressions. A few of the younger staff members were holding each other. Saravel found a wall and sat against it and pulled out her personal communicator. The signal was weak down here but not gone. She managed to pull up an exterior feed. A camera mounted on the station's outer hull, still functioning, pointed outward toward the battle. The Dreth fleet was moving closer to the planet now. Methodical, unhurried. The way something moves when it is not afraid of anything. She could see the surface of Velorath below, her world, her violet sky, and she could see small bright streaks beginning to arc down through the upper atmosphere where debris was falling. Then a notification blinked onto her screen, a signal response, from the direction of the outer system edge. One ship. The data read it clearly. One human vessel had come out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. One ship against a fleet of 47. The designation on the signal was simple and clean: USCS Unbroken. Someone beside her in the shelter laughed, not a happy laugh, but the short and broken kind that comes out when something is too awful to process normally. A Velkari elder near the back of the room shook his head slowly. "One ship," he said quietly. "They sent one ship." Saravel looked at her screen. She looked at the single point of light moving inward through the black toward the Dreth fleet. She thought about the humans she had known. Their strange habits, their loud voices, the way they never seemed to fully understand when something was supposed to be impossible. She did not laugh. She did not shake her head. She watched the single light moving steadily through the dark, and she felt something she could not name settle somewhere in the center of her chest. She pulled her knees up to her chest and kept her eyes on the screen, and she waited. The Unbroken did not slow down. It did not turn. It kept moving forward. The Dreth Dominion had conquered 31 worlds. That was the number recorded in galactic intelligence files. 31 worlds in 40 years. Some had fought back. Some had tried to negotiate. Some had simply surrendered the moment the fleet appeared, hoping that cooperation would earn them gentler treatment. None of it had made much difference in the end. The Dreth did not conquer out of hatred or anger. They did it the way a machine does a job, steadily, efficiently, without hesitation and without mercy. Their warlord, a massive figure named Drevak, sat in the command chair of his flagship and looked at the single human ship on his long-range screen with something close to amusement. He had dealt with human vessels before, briefly, at the edge of the Terran border. He had found them unremarkable. Small ships, small species, young and loud and not worth serious consideration. He let his communications officer open a channel to the incoming vessel anyway. It was the polite thing to do. He would give them the chance to turn around. He always did. The response came back almost immediately. The voice on the channel was calm, not the forced calm of someone trying very hard not to sound afraid. Genuinely calm, flat and steady, the way a table is flat and steady, as if the speaker had looked at the situation and simply decided that panic was not a tool he planned to use today. "This is Commander Cale Harrow of the USCS Unbroken. You are conducting an unprovoked military assault on a protected Allied world. I am formally requesting that you withdraw your fleet from Velorath space immediately. This request will not be repeated." Drevak listened to the whole thing. Then he leaned back in his chair and said to no one in particular, "One ship." His officers confirmed it. One human vessel, mid-class, standard armament by their records, moving in at full burn, no escort, no backup signal on any frequency. Drevak sent his response. "Human, you are one ship, we are 47, return to your space or we will remove you from ours." A short pause, then, "I heard you, I'm still coming." The amusement faded. Drevak nodded to his weapons officer. The three nearest Dreth cruisers opened fire. In the shelter below the peace station, Saravel was watching her communicator screen with both hands wrapped around it. The exterior camera feed was shaky, and the resolution was not good, but it was enough. She could see the Unbroken on the edge of the frame, and she could see the three beams of directed energy fire tear through the space where it had been half a second before. Where it had been, because it was not there anymore. The Unbroken had moved, not in a straight line, not in a clean arc, but in a sudden sharp angle that looked almost wrong, like a ship was not supposed to be able to change direction that quickly at that speed. The energy beams passed through empty space, and two of them struck each other on the far side, scattering wide. Someone in the shelter behind Saravel said, "What was that?" She did not answer. She leaned closer to the screen. The Unbroken came back on a new heading, moving directly into the gap between two of the cruisers, and for a moment it seemed like the most reckless thing she had ever seen, flying straight into the middle of them. But then the human ship fired, and it did not fire at the cruisers. It fired at the space between them, at the precise point where their overlapping energy shields were thinnest, and the shot punched through like a needle through cloth and struck the far cruiser in a section that was clearly not armored for that angle of impact. The far cruiser's port engine exploded. The shelter went quiet. Saravel's hands tightened on her communicator. The Dreth fleet reorganized. More ships turned toward the Asterisk Unbroken, 7 now, then 10, converging from different directions to cut off its movement. Drevak's voice came over the open channel again. She could hear it faintly through the communicator's audio feed, and he was not amused anymore. He was issuing orders, and the orders were clear. Do not let it maneuver, box it in, end this quickly. It should have worked. Against any other ship, against any other crew, boxing them in with 10 warships should have ended the fight in under a minute. The Asterisk Unbroken asterisk flew down. Not metaphorically. It pointed its nose toward the planet and dove, hard and fast, dropping into Velorath's upper atmosphere where the Dreth ships could not fire at full power without risking atmospheric ignition. The air around the hull lit up orange and white from the friction of re-entry speed, and the ship skimmed the upper clouds like a stone thrown flat across water, and then it came back up on the other side of the Dreth formation, behind them now, and opened fire again before they had fully turned. 2 more Dreth ships took serious damage. One broke off and began moving away from the fight, trailing debris. In the shelter, someone started crying again, but this time it did not sound like the crying of people who had given up. It sounded like the crying of people who had just seen something they could not believe. Saravel was not crying. She was barely breathing. She was watching the screen with an intensity she usually reserved for problems she was trying to solve, cataloging every move, every angle, every impossible decision the human commander was making in real time. He was not flying like someone trying to win. He was flying like someone who had already decided he was not going to lose. There was a difference. She understood that difference clearly, even if she could not fully explain it. Then the damaged Dreth cruiser, the first one, the one that had lost its port engine, changed course. It was moving erratically, out of formation, and for a moment Saravel assumed it was retreating. She tracked its new heading on the screen and her stomach dropped. It was not retreating. It was falling, damaged, partially out of control, and its new heading took it directly over the civilian district of the northern continent below, the district where her mother was, where her younger brother was, where 100,000 Velkari civilians had taken shelter in underground levels that were not designed to survive the impact of a falling warship. She could not do anything. She sat in the shelter with her communicator in her hands, and she watched the cruiser's slow, terrible arc toward her world, and she could not do anything at all. Then the unbroken asterisk moved again. It came out of a banking turn and repositioned with that same sharp, almost wrong-looking speed change, putting itself directly in the path of the falling cruiser. It fired not at the cruiser's weapons, not at its hull, but at its remaining engine, precise and deliberate, pushing it off its current trajectory just enough. Then it took up a position between the cruiser and the surface, and it fired again and again, breaking the cruiser apart in sections small enough that, when they hit the atmosphere, they burned instead of landing. The asterisk unbroken shook visibly from the debris strikes. Saravel could see the hull damage even through the low-resolution feed, scoring marks, a section of plating gone near the rear, small venting trails of gas that meant internal breaches. The ship had taken that damage deliberately. It had put itself between the falling cruiser and the civilian district and held that position until the threat was gone. For a moment the open channel was quiet. Then Drevak's voice came back, slower this time, more careful. "Human, why are you still here? This is not your world, these are not your people. No single ship can win this battle, you know this." Kale Harrow's voice came back just as steady as before, just as flat, just as calm. "Because someone I care about is on that planet, and I haven't run out of options yet." The shelter was completely silent. Saravel lowered her communicator for just a moment and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth and breathed. Then she raised it again and looked at the screen. The unbroken asterisk was already moving again, already finding a new angle, already finding the next gap. She looked at the partial visual that had come through on the bridge feed, blurry, half obscured by static, the commander's face hidden behind a tactical visor. She could not see his face, but she could see his hands on the console, resting there with a stillness that made no sense given everything happening around them. And she could see his left wrist. A bracelet, simple, worn, braided cord, 2 colors twisted together, one blue, one gold. Her blue, his gold. Saravel stopped breathing entirely. She knew that bracelet. She had made that bracelet. She had tied it onto the wrist of a laughing human boy in a sunlit garden a very long time ago, and told him it was so he would not forget where he had a friend. Her hands were shaking now. Outside, the asterisk unbroken kept fighting. The unbroken was dying. Not quickly, not all at once, but Saravel could see it happening in pieces on her communicator screen, and each piece felt like something being taken away that could not be given back. The rear plating was mostly gone now. 2 of the 4 main weapon arrays had gone dark after taking direct hits. The ship moved a little slower than it had at the start, not much, but enough that she noticed, and she was certain the Dreth noticed too. A thin trail of venting gas followed the ship wherever it went, catching the light of Velorath's sun like a pale ribbon. 40 minutes had passed since the asterisk unbroken had first entered the system. 14 Dreth ships had been destroyed or forced out of the fight. One had broken apart completely when Kale had used the planet's magnetic field to bend a weapon's shot around the curve of a cruiser's shielding, something her people's own scientists had theorized about for decades and never actually managed. 3 more had pulled back with damage serious enough to keep them from continuing. The rest were still in formation, still pressing in, and there were still 30 of them. 30 against 1. The math had not changed. It had never been good math. Saravel understood this clearly. She was a scientist and she understood numbers, and the numbers said that the Unbroken should have been destroyed in the first 5 minutes. The fact that it was still out there, still moving, still fighting, sat somewhere outside the clean edges of what she could explain with equations. In the shelter around her, people had stopped panicking. That was the strangest thing. 40 Velkari of various ages and species, packed into a reinforced room underground, and at some point in the last half hour they had all gone quiet and still. Not the stillness of fear, something else. They were watching their screens and communicators the same way Saravel was watching hers, and nobody was speaking because speaking felt like it might break something. An older Velkari woman sitting near the door had her eyes closed and her lips moving slightly. Saravel did not know if she was praying or calculating. Maybe both. Up above, Kale Harrow kept flying. She watched him take the Asterisk Unbroken through a gap between two Dreth cruisers that was, by her rough estimate, about 40% narrower than the ship's wingspan. She watched both cruisers fire at the exact same moment and watched Kale roll the ship sideways at the last possible instant, so that the shots passed above and below instead of through. She watched him fire back on the way through the gap without even pausing, 2 clean shots at the cruiser's engine sections, and both shots landed. She had no words for it. She watched it happen and she had no words. A junior researcher named Tell, who worked 2 desks over from Saravel in the Orbital Science Division, and who had always struck her as someone not easily impressed, sat down next to her on the floor and said, very quietly, "How is he still doing this?" Saravel shook her head slowly. "I don't know." "Is he afraid?" She thought about it. She thought about that voice on the open channel, flat and steady and completely without drama. She thought about those hands resting still on the console while the ship moved through fire. "I think he's too busy to be afraid right now," she said. Tell looked at the screen for another moment. "I didn't know humans could fly like that." "I don't think most of them can," Saravel said. She almost said more. She almost said his name. But she pressed her lips together and kept it inside because she was not yet ready to say it out loud. Because saying it out loud would make it real, and she needed to keep watching first. She needed to see how this ended before she let herself feel any of it. The open channel crackled. Drevak's voice came through again, and this time something in it had shifted. He still sounded controlled, still measured, but underneath that there was something new, a tension that had not been there before, a tightness around the edges of his words. "Human," he said, "your ship is failing. I can see your venting trails. I can see your weapon output dropping. You cannot continue at this rate. Stand down now and I will allow your crew to live." A pause. The Unbroken was in the middle of a wide banking turn, repositioning for something. Saravel watched it move and waited. "I appreciate the offer," Kale said, "but I'm going to have to say no." "You will die out here," Drevak said. The words were not heated. They were stated as a fact, the way a person states that water is wet. No reinforcements are coming. No other human vessels have entered this system. You are alone and your ship is breaking apart. No rational being continues a fight they cannot win. The Unbroken completed its turn. It was now pointed directly at the center of the Dreth formation. Nose on, straight line, no angle, no evasion. Kale's voice came back, still calm, still flat, completely serious. "I've never been particularly rational." He fired the main drive to full. Saravel sat up straighter. Something about the ship's angle and speed looked different from every approach it had made so far. It was not dodging. It was not looking for gaps. It was not being clever. It was going straight in, fast, directly toward the heart of the Dreth fleet, toward the flagship itself, and the speed it was building was far beyond anything a ship that damaged should have been pushing its engines to. "What is he doing?" Tell said beside her. Saravel understood it 2 seconds before it happened. Her mind put together the pieces the way it put together scientific problems: speed, angle, the venting trails she had been watching. the FTL drive that had been running hot since the start of the engagement, the damage to the rear section where the drive core sat. A damaged FTL drive pushed to its limit did not explode cleanly. It released energy in a pulse, directed, uncontrolled, enormous. She grabbed Tell's arm without thinking. He's going to use the drive. As a weapon. As a pulse, right through the middle of their formation. The shelter went completely silent for the second time. The unbroken asterisk hit the edge of the Dreth formation, and the FTL drive released. Even through the low-resolution camera feed, even underground, even through the reinforced walls of the shelter, Saravel saw the light. A white pulse that expanded outward from the human ship in a perfect ring, moving through the Dreth formation like a wave moves through water, not burning, not destroying with heat, but pushing with a force that no hull plating was designed to absorb from the inside of a formation. Ships were thrown sideways. Ships collided with each other. The flagship itself was struck broadside and spun hard, its running lights flickering out. 7 Dreth ships were destroyed outright by the pulse or by the collisions that followed. 11 more were damaged beyond combat capability. The formation, carefully maintained, always so precise, came apart completely. Then the Unbroken was there in the middle of it all, half its systems offline, barely moving but still there, still in one piece, still pointing itself at the next target. And across the open channel there was silence from the Dreth side, a long silence. Saravel counted the seconds. Then Drevak's voice came back, and now the thing underneath was no longer just tension. She had never heard a Dreth warlord sound uncertain before. She was not sure she was supposed to be able to. "What are you?" he said. It came out less like a tactical question and more like a genuine one. Like something a person asks when the world has stopped following the rules they thought it lived by. Kale did not answer immediately. When he did, he kept it short. "Someone who isn't done yet." The first Dreth ship turned away, then a second, then 3 more at once. They were not retreating in panic. The Dreth did not panic. They were making a calculation, the way they always made calculations, weighing cost against gain, measuring what the continued assault on this world would cost them against what taking it would give them. What they were calculating now, Saravel understood, was the cost of fighting something that had already survived everything they had thrown at it and was still pointing itself forward. The flagship's drives ignited. It began to move away from Velorath. One by one, the remaining Dreth ships followed. The battle was over in the way a held breath is over, not with a sound but with a release. Saravel sat on the floor of the shelter with her communicator in her hands and watched the last Dreth ship disappear from the camera feed, and then she sat there in the silence and did not move for a long moment. Around her, the shelter erupted. People were standing, holding each other, some laughing and some crying, and some doing both at the same time. Tell had both hands pressed over his face. The old woman near the door had opened her eyes and was looking at the ceiling with an expression that Saravel did not have a word for. Saravel stood up slowly. Her legs felt unsteady. She looked at her screen one more time. The unbroken asterisk was still there, barely holding together, moving slowly into low orbit, venting trails thicker than before, one whole side of the hull dark and still, but moving, steady, requesting emergency docking clearance in that same calm voice. Her thumb moved to the partial bridge image that had been frozen on her screen since the visual feed had cut out 20 minutes ago. She looked at the blurry image of a hand on a console, the braided cord, blue and gold. She closed her eyes. She knew exactly who was on that ship. She had always known, somewhere underneath everything, from the moment she had heard that voice on the open channel, flat and steady and completely certain. The way he had always been certain, even as a boy, even when he was small and the world was large and difficult. She had known, and she had not let herself know because knowing meant feeling it, and feeling it meant that all the years between now and then would have to be crossed at once. She opened her eyes. She put her communicator in her pocket. She walked to the shelter door, and she started climbing the stairs. The docking bay of the peace station had never been designed for a moment like this. It was a functional space, clean white walls, service equipment along the sides, magnetic docking clamps built into the floor, bright overhead lighting that made everything look a little too sharp and a little too real. It was the kind of room that was meant for quiet arrivals and routine departures, not for history. And yet somehow, in the hour after the Dreth fleet disappeared from Velorath's sky, it had filled with people who all understood, without anyone having to say it, that something worth witnessing was about to happen here. The High Council stood near the front. Saravel's father was among them, still in his silver ceremonial robes, though one sleeve was torn from when he had pulled someone out of the way during the first strike. The senior diplomats from the other attending species stood nearby, some still in the formal clothes from the opening ceremony, looking out of place in them, now the same way formal clothes always look out of place after something serious has happened. Station crew lined the walls. Scientists. Medics with their equipment ready. Delegates who had been strangers to each other 6 hours ago and were now standing shoulder to shoulder without noticing. Saravel stood near the back. She had not pushed to the front. She had climbed the stairs from the shelter, walked through the damaged upper levels of the station past broken glass and flickering lights and the smell of scorched metal, and she had come to the docking bay and found a place near the rear wall where she could see without being seen, and she had stood there and waited. The Unbroken had taken 40 minutes to make it to docking, emergency systems only. The station's own crew had helped guide it in manually because the ship's navigation was operating on backup power, and the pilot was apparently doing everything by hand. The docking clamps had engaged with a deep metallic sound that Saravel felt in her chest more than heard. Then there was a long wait while pressure was equalized, and the airlock connection was confirmed safe. During that wait, nobody in the bay spoke very much. Her father said something quietly to the council member beside him. One of the medics checked her equipment for the third time. A young station technician near Saravel was gripping his own wrist with his opposite hand without seeming to realize he was doing it. The airlock door indicator changed from red to green. The door opened. The first person through was a young human woman in a crew uniform, her left arm in a makeshift sling, a long scrape across her forehead that had been cleaned but not yet properly treated. She stepped into the bay and looked around at the assembled crowd with wide eyes, and the crowd looked back at her, and for a moment nothing happened. Then someone, one of the Velkari medics, stepped forward gently and guided her to the side where the medical team was waiting, and the crowd parted to let them through. 2 more crew members followed, then a fourth, all of them marked with the small damages of a ship that had been through what the asterisk Unbroken had been through: torn uniforms, burn marks on hands and arms, the particular kind of exhaustion that lives in a person's eyes when they have been running on focus and will alone for too long, and the focus has just now been allowed to stop. Then Commander Kale Harrow stepped through the airlock door. Saravel had prepared herself. She had spent the last 40 minutes telling herself very firmly to be still and be calm and behave in the way that a Velkari scientist of her standing was supposed to behave in a formal public setting. She was good at being still. She was good at being calm. She had practiced both her entire life. All of that preparation lasted approximately 2 seconds. He was taller than she remembered. That was the first thing her mind registered uselessly, as if height was the relevant thing right now. He was wearing a commander's uniform that had been through a great deal and showed it clearly scorched at the shoulders, a long tear down the left side, the rank insignia on his chest hanging by one corner. There was a shallow cut across his jaw, dried now, and a bruise forming along his right cheekbone. His visor was pushed up onto his forehead, and his hair was damp with sweat, and his eyes, when they moved across the crowd in the bay, were the same gray-green color she remembered from when they were children, and she had not thought about that color in years, and now it was the only thing she could see. He looked tired in the way that a person looks tired when they have given everything they had and come out the other side of it. He looked other than that, exactly like himself. The High Council stepped forward. Her father moved with them, and Velarin was a man who had spent his whole career knowing exactly what to say in every kind of moment, and he drew breath to begin the formal reception. The words of gratitude and honor that a moment like this required, the recognition of valor and sacrifice that the council had prepared. Saravel walked through the crowd. She did not decide to do it. Her legs simply moved, and the people between her and the front of the room stepped aside without her asking them to. And she was aware of her father looking at her, and aware of the council members looking at her, and aware that every eye in the docking bay had shifted to follow her movement, and she did not care about any of it. She stopped 2 feet in front of him. Cale looked down at her. He was quiet for a moment, and she was quiet, and the entire docking bay was quiet around them, and the moment stretched out long enough that it had a weight to it, the weight of years, of distance, of all the time that had passed between a garden on the northern continent and this scorched docking bay. Then the corner of his mouth moved, slow and tired and real, the same smile, the exact same smile he had always had, not wide, not performed, just a small honest thing that appeared when he meant it. "Hi, Sira," he said. His voice was quiet, just for her. All of that flat, steady command channel calm was still there, but underneath it now she could hear something else, something warm and a little rough around the edges, the voice of someone who had been very frightened for a long time and was only now allowing himself to stop. Saravel was a composed person. She was a scientist. She was the daughter of the high diplomat, and she had been raised to conduct herself with grace in public settings, and she had never, not once in her adult life, lost her composure in front of the council. She burst into tears. Not quietly, not the dignified kind that could be mistaken for something else. She pressed her hand over her mouth, and the sound that came out of her was small and broken and completely honest. And then Cale's arms came around her, and she grabbed the front of his ruined uniform and held on and cried into his shoulder in front of the High Council, and every delegate and every crew member and every person in that bay, and she did not care even slightly. His arms tightened around her. She felt him exhale, long and slow, the kind of breath that a person lets out when they have finally put something very heavy down. "I got your world's distress signal," he said quietly into her hair. "Did you really think I wasn't coming?" She could not answer that. She just held on tighter. Nobody in the docking bay moved or spoke. Her father stood very still with his prepared words forgotten entirely, watching his daughter hold onto this battered human commander, and the expression on his face moved through several different things before settling somewhere that was not quite surprise and not quite understanding, but was close to both. After a while, Saravel did not know how long she pulled back enough to look at him properly. Her eyes went to his left wrist. The bracelet was there, exactly as it had been on the screen, blue and gold, worn thin in places from years of wear, the color faded a little but still clear, still whole. She touched it with 2 fingers very lightly. Her throat tightened again. She remembered the afternoon she had made it. She had been 12 years old in Velkari years, which made her something like 10 in human ones. He had been 11. They had been sitting in the garden behind the research station, and she had found a piece of blue cord from somewhere, and he had contributed the gold lace from his boot, because he was the kind of child who thought that was a perfectly reasonable thing to sacrifice, and she had braided them together while he sat still and watched with the particular patience he could produce when something mattered to him. She remembered telling him it was his colors and her colors together. She remembered him looking at it seriously on his wrist and then looking at her and saying he would never take it off. She remembered not believing him. She had been 12. She had thought it was the kind of thing people said. He had not taken it off. All the years he had been gone, the academy, the training, the deep space assignments, the silence between them that had grown longer and wider until it felt like something permanent. And through all of it, this worn piece of braided cord had stayed on his wrist. "You kept it," she said. Her voice came out unsteady. "I told you I would," he said simply. Behind them, carefully and quietly, as if the docking bay itself was trying not to interrupt, the council members began to lower their heads one by one. Not the formal bow of ceremony. Something smaller and more real. The acknowledgement of something they had just witnessed that their prepared words had no framework for. Her father looked at his daughter, and at this human who had come alone into a battle with 47 warships, and he was quiet for a long time. Then Velarin, high diplomat of the Velkari, who had never in 30 years of service been at a loss for the right thing to say, clasped his hands together and said nothing at all. He simply stepped back and gave them the space. It was the truest thing he could have offered. Cale's legs chose that moment to remind him that he had been running on empty for the last 2 hours. He swayed slightly, and Saravel caught his arm, and the medics moved in quickly and professionally, and there was a brief and slightly undignified shuffle of getting him seated on a medical kit that someone had pushed forward. He accepted this with the same quiet practicality he seemed to apply to everything. Saravel sat beside him on the floor of the docking bay and did not let go of his arm. Around them, the bay slowly came back to life, medics working, crew members being seen to, the council beginning to speak in low voices, the ordinary sounds of people beginning to pick up after something extraordinary. But for a few minutes more, in the middle of all of it, Saravel sat on the floor next to the most impossible person she had ever known, and held onto his arm and listened to him breathe, and did not say anything at all. It was enough. It was more than enough. The news traveled faster than any official report could. Before the High Council had drafted a single formal statement, before the diplomatic channels had been properly opened, before anyone in the galactic community had received an authorized account of what had happened at Velorath, the story was already moving. Ship crews passing through nearby systems carried it. Traders picked it up at relay stations. Intelligence networks that monitored Dreth movement flagged the sudden, unannounced withdrawal of a 47-ship fleet from a target world, and began asking questions that led, eventually, to the same answer. 1 human ship. 1 human commander. 47 Dreth warships sent home. The reaction across the galaxy was not uniform. Some species received the news with open disbelief and spent several days demanding verification. Others received it with the quiet, unsettled feeling of people who have just learned that something they thought they understood does not work the way they thought. 2 minor systems on the outer rim that had been quietly preparing to submit to Dreth Dominion terms without a fight changed their positions almost immediately after the story reached them. The reasoning, as one of their representatives later put it simply, was, if 1 human ship would come for an allied world, perhaps it was worth finding out what an alliance with humans actually meant. The Dreth Dominion said nothing publicly. They did not need to. Within 3 weeks, Velkari intelligence confirmed that 3 planned Dreth operations in nearby systems had been quietly cancelled. No announcement was made. The fleet movements simply stopped. The math had changed and the Dominion had read it. On Velorath, the rebuilding began. The orbital defense grid would take years to fully repair. Parts of the northern continent where debris had landed needed clearing and assessment. The peace station itself had sustained damage on 4 of its upper levels. There was a great deal of difficult and unglamorous work ahead, the kind that does not make for dramatic stories, but that matters far more in the long run than any single battle. Cale spent 4 days in the medical bay. He was not a good patient. Saravel visited every day and found him, each time, either trying to leave before the medics had cleared him, asking for updates on the Asterisk Unbroken's Asterisk repair status, or having quiet and very reasonable-sounding arguments with the medical staff about whether certain restrictions were truly necessary. The medical staff, to their credit, held firm. Saravel sat in the chair beside his bed and read her research notes and let him argue and said nothing, which he eventually recognized as the particular kind of silence that meant she agreed with the medics and was simply waiting for him to figure that out himself. On the fourth day, he stopped arguing and slept for 14 hours. When he woke up, the medics cleared him. Velorath was beginning to look like itself again by then. The debris in the lower atmosphere had mostly burned away. The sky had returned to its deep, familiar violet. The nights were clear, and the two moons rose on opposite ends of the horizon the way they always had, and the bioluminescent fields outside the research station on the northern continent lit up blue and gold at dusk the way they always did when the temperature dropped. It was there in that garden that Saravel found Kale on the 5th evening after his discharge. He was sitting on the low stone wall at the garden's edge, the one they had both sat on as children, looking out over the glowing fields toward the tree line. He had found a plain change of clothes somewhere, no uniform, no rank insignia, and he looked, in the fading light, less like a commander and more like the boy she remembered. She sat beside him on the wall. For a while neither of them said anything. The fields moved softly in the evening wind and the bioluminescence shifted in slow waves, and above them the first stars were beginning to appear in the violet sky. It was a quiet that did not need filling. Then Kale said, "I heard the council wants to give me a formal honor." "Several formal honors," Saravel said. "My father has been writing the speech for 3 days. He has rewritten it 5 times. He cannot seem to find the right words." Kale made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. "I wouldn't know what to do with formal honors." "You would stand still and accept them politely," she said. "I have seen you be polite when you choose to be." "I choose to be polite fairly often." "You argued with the medical staff for 4 days." "That was a professional disagreement." She looked at him sideways and he looked back at her, and they were both quiet for a moment in the way of two people who know each other well enough for silence to be comfortable. She had been thinking for several days about what she wanted to say to him. She had composed it carefully in her head, the way she composed everything, ordered and clear, beginning and middle and end. She was a scientist. She liked things to be precise. Now, sitting beside him on the wall where they had sat as children, she found that all the careful words she had prepared had left her entirely. What remained was simpler. "You came alone," she said. "The rest of the fleet was 2 systems over," he said. "It would have taken them 6 hours. I was closer." A pause. 6 hours was too long. "You could have died." "I could have," he agreed. He did not say it lightly. He said it the way a person says a true thing simply without dressing it up. "I thought about that. I thought about it the whole way in." "And you came anyway." "And I came anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. He met her eyes and did not look away and did not try to make it smaller than it was. "I need to understand something," she said. "For myself, not for the council's report or the formal record, for me." She paused. "My people have studied humans for decades. We have cataloged your biology, your history, your social structures. We have worked beside you and lived near you and called you allies. And in all of that time, I do not think we have ever fully understood what you are. What makes you," she searched for the right word, "like this?" Kale was quiet for a moment. He looked out over the glowing fields. When he answered, he did not reach for anything grand. "We love things," he said. "That's most of it. We find things that matter to us and we hold on to them, and when those things are in danger, the rest of it, the math, the odds, the reasonable options, it all goes somewhere else for a while." He looked at her. "I'm not special, Sira. Any human who got that distress signal and knew you were down here would have come." "I don't believe that," she said. "Maybe not exactly the same way," he allowed. "But the wanting to, that part would have been the same." She thought about that. She thought about everything she had watched on that communicator screen in the shelter, the movements, the decisions, the voice on the open channel. She thought about what Drevek had asked and what Kale had said. The math stops mattering. I submitted an address to the council yesterday, she said. It will be distributed to the allied worlds next week. I wrote about humans. What did you say? I said that we have spent 40 years studying your species and classifying you incorrectly. We placed you in categories that made sense to us: young civilization, developing technology, emerging ally. We measured you by the things we knew how to measure. She paused. I told them that we were measuring the wrong things. He waited. I told them that humans are not best understood by their technology or their history or their physical capabilities. They are best understood by what they show up for. She looked at him steadily. No other species in this alliance would have come alone. No other species would have looked at 47 ships and decided that the math was simply not the point. That is not a criticism of those species. It is simply a difference. She paused. You calculate with your hearts. And your hearts do not know how to accept an outcome where something you love is lost. Kale was quiet for a moment. That's a generous way to describe it. It is an accurate way, she said. The stars were fully out now. The moons had risen, one on each side of the horizon, the fields between them glowing soft and steady. Saravel reached into the pocket of her coat and took out a length of braided cord. She had made it that afternoon in her quarters the way she had made the first one a very long time ago. The same two colors twisted together, blue and gold. She took his left hand. She tied the new bracelet beside the old one, careful and slow, the same knot she had learned as a child. When it was done, she held his wrist in both her hands for a moment and looked at the two of them side by side, the old one worn and faded, the new one bright. She did not explain it. She did not attach any words to it this time. The first time she had needed words. This time the gesture was enough and they both knew it. Kale turned his hand over and held hers. They sat on the wall in the garden where they had played as children and looked out at the glowing fields and the two moons and the stars. And the violet sky above Velorath was calm and quiet and whole. She had always known humans were strange. She understood now that strange, in this case, meant something specific. It meant the kind of person who gets a distress signal from far away and does not stop to calculate the odds. It meant the kind of person who keeps a worn bracelet on his wrist for years